Hi guys, and welcome back. And today we'll crack on with getting the figures painted for the Castle Itter Dio.
So I base coated all of the figures first, obviously, and probably the only thing that I did different, because I had German troops, I had American infantry, and I had American tank crew, and then I had some civilian figures, was that I base coated differentially. So the German troops got a grey base coat, a darker grey, and then progressively, as you'll see as we go along, lighten that up to get some texture and some light and shade along the journey. And then I did fundamentally the same with the American tank crew and the US infantry as well, with the greens and the greys. Virtually all of the paint I use is the Vallejo, either the Model Colour or the Model Air. I do tend to find the Model Air can be a little thin. That's generally okay, but it's not okay if that's the colour you want to use, but you want to use it when you're doing the detailed painting, because I find that can be a little hard to manage. So mainly Model Air for the undercoat and base coats like this, and then Model Colour for the detailed painting. I've got a couple of other odds and sods around, but typically the place I order it from has a great range, and I trust them, so they work pretty well. So here, just doing the US tank crew guys and putting on a pale grey. I think I decided to do this. I'd initially done a darker grey for the lower half, but then when I looked at more reference pictures, I couldn't really see a vast difference between the upper half and the lower half, so stuck with the pale grey in the finish. And when I did the US infantry guys, just really gave them a dark green. I think it was Russian tank green from memory as the base coat, and then worked it up from there. Now, as you can see, I'll never really be able to tell people precisely what colours I use, especially for uniforms, because I very, very rarely use a colour straight out of the bottle, so I will always tend to mix something else in with it and try and get variations in tones, and very rarely use the same colour on two consecutive figures, even if it's the same uniform. So I'll go with different shades, slightly different shades. Sometimes I'll just paint on a completely odd colour over the base coat to form a second base coat to give colour variation through what might be a very similar, top coat. And sometimes these guys can get 3 or 4 coats, so it just depends on what I'm trying to achieve and how it looks. And I find it really hard to film the figure painting because my eyesight's really not that great, so I have to tend to get very close so I can cast shadows, and I haven't yet found a perfect spot for the camera. So the colours that the camera and the lighting that it is in is often not very true to life when you're looking at it in person. So I started by painting the civilian figure, which represents the French political prisoner General Reynaud, and had a little bit of license there because all I have of him is black and white photos exiting the castle on the day of the relief column arrived, and it's just a very dark suit, jacket, overcoat and black trousers. So I'm using total artistic license in the colour palette here, so I thought some dark blue trousers and the matching hat, and then an overcoat. So here I'm trying to, in my mind, I thought it'd be like a very subtle checked overcoat, and I thought I'd put that on by putting some bright yellow lines on and then putting some washes of brown over. It didn't quite come out how I imagined it would. And then on to the female figure who's firing a weapon in the dio. The recount of the history doesn't specifically spell out any of the females who are in the castle in active fighting. So again, a little bit of poetic license on my part, but I think it looks a bit different in the diorama. Again, this is the Sepp figure, so the German commander who got the whole thing going and got the Americans onto the fact that the SS were heading back to the castle to liberate the prisoners or to take them as hostages. And again, that green is probably 3 or 4 different greens mixed together just as the next base coat. And here just showing a little bit of the detailed work, and I tend to use a sharpened toothpick to do things like buttons and get the paint on to the eagle. I feel I can control it better. You don't get that sort of bendy effect that you can sometimes get with a very fine pointed 5-0 or 10-0 brush, and suddenly the paint's not exactly where you wanted it. So this seems to work well for me in most instances, but sometimes it doesn't work. And the other thing I find with practice, and this footage is sped up a little bit, but with practice, if you sort of have a go at it fairly confidently and don't hesitate, it seems to come out better. And then just a little bit of dry brushing here, and the boot details on these figures, and I think these are the master box figures, although I honestly can't remember because I sort of cannibalised bits and pieces, arms and legs and things from all the different kits. They had some nice, what I would assume would be hobnails, so I just gave them a light dusting. And I thought for this next little bit I might concentrate on showing as much of the painting around the detail of the face, so getting all the base colours on and getting the shading on and getting it to a point. And look, I'm a horribly inefficient painter. I'm constantly poking at it and going back and touching up on it. Here I'm just putting a very light wash into the eyeballs to take the whiteness out of the whites and to just leave a very thin rim around the eyelids, so that the insides of the eyelids. It's probably not worth doing because you can't really see it unless you're looking up close, but I know it's there. And then I've been experimenting with just using a pencil to get a little bit of colour in for like eyelashes, and even just sort of like a little bit of darkness under the eye, sort of bags under the eyes, or a bit of shade under the nose, or under the lower lip or the chin. And again, because I feel it just gives me a little bit more control, and it's also easier to get off and blend in than perhaps additional paint. So my painting technique's still evolving and probably will always continue to evolve, and I just keep experimenting. But I was happy with most of the faces from this crew, this group of 12. But a couple of them, when I look at them in the cold light of day, under a magnifying glass, I sort of think, yeah, maybe not, but I'm sure that will continue to improve. But I really do enjoy painting the figures, and I like to get as much detail into the faces as I can. So initially we'll mark up the eye position with the pencil. I've given that a try this time around. Again, for that control and less shaking of the hand and less consequence if I get it wrong, it's easier to fix it up. So it just gives me a sense of, are the eyes looking in the right direction, and have I got the sort of, they're not cross-eyed and they're vaguely, where I want them to be. And then having done that, I can come back in later on with the sharpened toothpick and the paint. I just felt it helped me get the paint right. Look, it's not always perfect. Sometimes one eye's a bit odder than the other eye, but by and large, I felt it gave me better control. And this is the Jack Little figure, so the Sutton Jenny's tank commander, who was basically in charge of the action. And I undercoated over the base coat of the lighter grey white, and then I put on the pale buff as the base colour for the jacket. As I said before, I'm not the most efficient painter, so I try to be careful, but I don't get paranoid about it. So I'd rather keep sort of clipping along, and you can see, and again, even though this is sped up a little bit, I'm reasonably brisk around the edges and where it contacts other parts, because part of the final product is, I think, for me, what I'm finding is if you're going back in to do touch-ups, you're getting tonal variation as well, and I never use the same colours again, so, they're a patchwork quilt. Now, it's a little bit like an oil painting. If you look at them too closely, if you're right up in their grill, with a magnifying glass, they look a little bit horrible. But if you're looking at them from a foot or 2 foot, 3 foot away, you get that real good tonal variation. So that's them in their various states of progress. And again, I was all over the shop. This is one figure that's got 5 different kits in it. So there's some Tamiya, there's some Master Box, there's some Mini Art, there's a Hornet head, and something else, I can't remember what the other one was. And that's for a special position, so his back looks quite flat, but it's because it's resting against the wall. And then it was on with all the equipment, so sort of the same philosophy. Everything gets base coated with a gunmetal grey base. And then the German equipment, I came back over virtually all of it with a German field grey, and the American equipment, I came back over that with a US olive drab. With the exception of German water bottles, I think I did them in the buff base. I honestly can't remember. And then just started to pick out the details as we went along. So not overly exciting to see, and won't spend a lot of time looking at that. I did have a couple of minor issues that I had to deal with because I paint the weapons separately. And I'd been really, if you might recall from the build video, I'd been really particular in getting the weapons in the hands right and spent a lot of time. And for some reason, 2 of them didn't fit, and this just required the use of the Dremel to take off a little bit of the jacket, the rifle butt. So I don't know. I think, as careful as I was, the reality is if that arm was just, half a millimetre lower than it was when I was doing all the dry fitting, it would probably have given this result. So cleaned up the Dremel work and just created a big enough space for the rifle butt to fit in. Obviously super careful at this point in the painting because it was pretty close to being finished and really just getting the guys ready now for a gloss coat in preparation for some decals and weathering. So I was paranoid that I was going to do more damage than good, so very hesitant and slow, and even slower than my normal slow, which is incredibly slow. But what I did find is because I'd been so fanatical about getting the fit right in the build, I virtually didn't have to glue any of the weapons in place because they were such snug fits, and it's not like I'm not going to be playing with them. Once they're on the dio base, they're going to be sitting on a shelf, and it's unlikely that they're going to get too much jolting around. So that was sort of good because there's nothing worse than getting that glossy glue residue when you've already painted. And the other figure that went horribly wrong was old mate here, who is sort of like will be firing one-handed while the other hand reaches searching for a grenade. And I don't know what I did, but the rifle butt was literally 3 or 4 millimetres away from being anywhere near his shoulder. And I just don't understand how that happened. So again, maybe I've pushed the shoulder back when I was trying to set it. I really don't understand. But so that required a little bit of remedial work. And in fact, what it required was finding a different weapon because the weapon that he had was never going to reach his shoulder in a natural sort of position no matter what I did. So I had to do major surgery on his arm so I could get the wrist in the right position and the forearm around, and it was all going to be a bit fragile. So I drilled through all of them so I could create a little bit of support with some wire and use that in a dry fitting to make sure I had the hand in the right place. I had to split the fingers open a little bit so the grip looked a little bit more natural, and then effectively elongated his arm enough to accommodate the new weapon, and then just use the Aves epoxy, which I must tell you I'm really loving, because what it doesn't require if you do it thoroughly is it doesn't require any sanding. If you use water right at the very end and smooth it right out, and you can actually start to get some ridges and seams and contours, and I've got a lot of improvement to do in my sculpting. But and I use the Aves as well for the helmet liner, which goes on the Sepp Gangi picture. So Sepp Gangi was, unfortunately, sadly, the only fatal casualty during the conflict, and he was shot by a sniper. And I thought that was a significant event in the engagement, and I wanted to, and it might sound odd, but I wanted to honour his bravery by showing his ultimate sacrifice, because he was a man who could have turned a blind eye to the situation. The war's nearly over. Why would you jeopardise yourself to risk your life and the life of those men that you still had loyal to save foreign VIP prisoners from the SS? And for me, I think that's a very brave decision, and I think it's, for me, it's also the right decision. It's a classic case of, not doing what's easy, doing what's right. So I'm depicting him at the moment that he was shot by the sniper, and that's not for any gory or sensationalistic purpose. It's simply to I guess, honour the fact that his bravery was the ultimate sacrifice. He was the only person who was killed during the engagement, but he died doing the right thing, and I think I have enormous respect for that. So that's the entire crew now, all painted and just about to go in for some clear gloss coat in preparation for the decals on some of them and weathering on most of them. So I wanted to try these out. I can remember, years and years and years and years ago having some decals in, I think, the Tamiya 88 centimeter flat gun kit, and being taken with the fact I could put the little red and white and black shields on the German soldiers' helmets. And so I'd been eyeing these off, and because the history of the engagement is so detailed, I knew exactly who was involved. So I was delighted when I found I could get colour patches for the 12th Armoured Division and I think the 34th Infantry Division. So if I've got that wrong, and the reason I hesitate is because I've got the wrong glasses on and I can't read the piece of paper that's next to me. So if that's wrong, you'll see a little bit of text pop up with a correction and an apology. So I ordered the Archer transfers online. They're dry transfers, so you get some, they call some medium paper, which is the white square of paper below the transfers in this picture. I remember as kids, and the UK guys might have used the same terminology, letraset. I don't know if it was marketed under the same name in the US, but very similar to that. You pretty much just varnish them on to the medium paper, and that turns them into water slide decals. So fantastic, super easy to do. Just have to be careful and take your time, but really impressed. And you get enough medium paper in with these ones anyway to do them on. I ordered some paper, and initially I had ordered some decal paper, and then I wasn't sure if I'd ordered the right paper, so I dropped Archers an email just asking, look, this is what I want to do, have I ordered the right thing? And their owner, a guy called Woody, got back to me with a very prompt email and said, no, if that's what you want to do, this is what you need, and gave me a little bit of advice, and just brilliant customer service. So Archers, you've got a customer for life, and they've got lots of other transfers for German shoulder patches and rank badges, and you name it, they've got it. And it's something I'm going to explore further in future dioramas, because I really like the effect that they gave when they were on, and I didn't put them on everyone. And before the rivet counters came out and say, oh, you should have cut the Hellcat label off the bottom because they didn't have it in 1945 on their jackets, and you'd be right. But I just like the look of it, and basically don't care if it's not historically correct, because the whole diorama is not historically correct. I'm making up most of it as I go along. But I like the extra slash of yellow down the bottom. So here I am putting them on, combination of camera in the way, bad eyes, and just a little bit clumsy, but patient, and got there in the finish. And as I said, I was very happy with the overall outcome. Just used a little bit of the decal softener and then the setting, Silver Set or whatever it's called. And you can poke it too much and move it around. But generally quite happy, and just that little splash of colour. And I put these on pre-weathering, and the guys that got the decals, I also gave another coat of gloss over the decals just to protect them as well, because I use the mineral spirits and oil paints. Well, actually, let me stop lying to you. I planned to use the oil paints and mineral spirits, but what I ended up using was that dust and rust from the Dust and Rust set, the one that I smothered the T-34 in my first hit out. So that's water-based, so I probably didn't need to do the extra coat, and it came out pretty well. Very sparingly, as you can see. I went once bitten, twice shy. I went very, very sparingly, and lots of water, and then lots of wet brushing along the way to make sure it didn't build up in too many places, which seemed to work okay.
And that's pretty much it. So I just wanted to come back and say goodbye. And thank you all for watching. So this is the second last video in the Castle Itter Dio series. And all I've got left to do is basically put the figures in place, whack a few sandbags in and a few boxes and some debris from the broken roof and some timbers, and a little bit of pigment dusting and weathering, and that will be it. So it's been a long journey. Thanks for sticking with me if you have to watch all of them. I think I started building the tank, the Easy 8 back in this November last year. I think the first video came out in November for the M group build, so I'm pretty sure Steve will laugh because I've missed the deadline, I would imagine, by quite some time. But it's been enjoyable, although I haven't been very quick. I have stuck with it, so lots of stuff happening in real life and very limited time at the bench, but I haven't given up on it, and slowly we get there. So again, thanks for watching, and I've really appreciated the comments that you've been kind enough to make so far and in the series. And as I said, the next one will hopefully not be too far away because there's not a huge amount of work to do, and my plan is to actually spend some time tomorrow getting the work done, so it'll just be the filming, so it might be out in a week or so, which would be ideal. Hopefully the information about the Castle Itter action has been interesting. I haven't gone into excruciating detail. I originally wrote out reams and reams of notes to cover, but it would have turned it into a really diabolical history lesson, and I didn't want to do that, so you look it up on Google if you're interested. Now, hopefully we might recognise this guy. It would be kind of you if you did, because that would acknowledge some modelling and painting skills, but of course it is our host for the M Group build, the time-travelling Steve Mottram. So just wanted to do this as a little bit of a nod to Steve and a little bit of an honouring of him, and thank him for having me as part of the build, and thank him for being a good mate, a mate that I've never met, but we've exchanged quite a few emails and what have you. So anyway, that's well enough from me. So look forward to your comments, as I said before. If you like what you've seen, perhaps if you're not already subscribed, subscribe. That way you won't miss any of the more recent updates, although you could subscribe by carrier pigeon, and thumbs up if you liked it. Thanks, guys. Bye.